Friendship, for example, is a real gift.
It's an insane world. In it there is one sanity, the loyalty of old friends.
You're the best friends anybody ever had.
Lone best friend, good.
Bubba was my best good friend. I had to make sure that he was okay.
Friendship and family, these are the things that matter.
Can we just become best friends? Yep.
Touch my friends again and I'll blind you. Thanks, Mike. You're my best friend here.
Lose one friend, lose all friends, lose yourself.
We ride together, we die together. Bad boys for life.
That's what friends are for, right?
Friends? Louis, I think this is the beginning of a beautiful friendship.
If you're not over here in 15 minutes, you can find a new best friend. You've been saying that since the 5th grade.
Welcome back to the I Am Your Friend podcast. I'm your host, Aiden Licker. Thank you so much for tuning in again. First solo episode of 2024. We're doing it. I'm still in full New Year mode. I'm resetting on everything. You know, yesterday I did when you do laundry and you're like, I'm going to fucking do all of the laundry, you know, like sheets, hand towels, any sort of cleaning cloths, anything. I threw everything in, you know what I mean? I had 3 washers going at the laundromat. You know, the laundromat lady's looking at me with dollar signs in her eyes because she knows I'm here to spend the big money. All right. And it felt good. It feels so good to have just fresh, clean everything set up. It really is good for the old temple up here, you know? And then also this morning, I decided to do a complete deep clean of my apartment, which I do pretty often, but I always try to step it up. So I got a Amazon gift card for Christmas and I literally used it on more cleaning supplies to try to do some more stuff. So got some of those Scrub Daddy sponges, not a sponsor, but how sick would that be, you know? But those things are cool. And I cleaned my entire kitchen area with those and then got some fresh microfiber cloths, dude. And just dusted and cleaned off everything in my apartment. I got one of those extendo clip dusters, you know what I'm talking about? So I can get up on the ceiling fan and stuff. It was really satisfying. I got up, I don't know what I just said there, but I got up, is what I meant to say, at 9:30 in the morning and just started cleaning everything. And I did that till 1:30 in the afternoon. So, and you know, this is not a big apartment. So that's some dedication that I was given to it. And now my apartment smells very nice. Everything looks very clean. I reorganized some stuff around, and it just feels like a nice reset, you know? And I'm stoked on that. I'm still going strong with the no booze and no social media, and it's been great. The no social media is, you know, I don't know how long it's been here, almost 2 weeks. And I don't even think about it, which is crazy to me because of how much time I typically spend on it. So yeah, I don't even think about it. I don't miss it at all. I don't feel like going on it, which is really exciting because any other time that I have done this where I take a break from social media, there's always part of me that figures out way to cheat a little bit. I'll go on the web browser on my computer and just log in for a second just to check briefly. And I don't even feel like doing that. And I mentioned it, I think on the last episode, that I think I'm just, I said January, but I think I'm just going to keep going. It's been so nice without it. And typically I've always thought about I have the need for it because I'm promoting something, whatever my creative endeavors are at the time. And right now, all I have is the podcast. And I really don't care about promoting it all that much right now. I know I have a steady amount of listeners that, you know, subscribe on YouTube and Apple Podcasts and Spotify and wherever else you get your podcast. If you're not one of those people, you can still do that right now. Just click follow or subscribe on whatever you're listening to this on. And that helps me out, you know, and then that way it doesn't matter if I promote the episode or not, because you're still going to see it show up when there's a new episode. So that's why we're here. And that's really all that matters to me. at this moment in time, you know? And I'm not even checking the numbers on this thing. So it very much could be just be talking into a void and nobody's even listening. And that's fine too, because it still feels good for me to do just as like a completed project. Like it was something I sought out to do and completed today. And that's, you know, a checkbox off in my brain that makes my brain feel good. And that's, you know, what it's all about here. All right. We're trying to make the brain feel good. I definitely am just noticing like a crazy shift in myself so far into this short wave into this new year of just like, man, just caring less really about things that I used to care a lot about. And in like a net positive way, you know, like, I don't know. I feel like my ego is really like kind of chilled right now. Which feels weird. I've talked a lot on this podcast before about how I think having, I guess I would call it a big ego, is not necessarily a bad thing. It's just really, you know, having like a healthy relationship with the ego. And that big ego that I feel like I've had forever is what led to like my drive of like wanting to push myself to do things. It's like, you know, what ultimately got me to move to New York. It's why I, you know, picked up a guitar in the first place. It's, you know, songwriting and like putting music out into the world. You know, it's like what got me to do all those things, stand-up comedy, all of it, right? And now I'm at a point where I'm like, I don't know. I feel like, I mean, I've talked about how moving to New York has humbled the shit out of me, which is like, I knew, you know, everybody told me was going to happen. That was like a big part of why I wanted to move here, because I feel like I desperately needed that. And that's been super nice as well. And so, yeah, I feel like my ego is kind of like chilled out, and now I really am kind of in tune with just like more of like the intuitive side of me rather than like the dreamer side of me. And I'm just kind of chilling in that space, you know, where it's like, yeah, I'm just kind of getting up every day and just like living my life. And like, that's enough for me for the first time ever, which is kind of crazy to think about. I wasn't even going to do a podcast episode today or for this week at all, because I was like, I don't know if I really care. But then there was part of me that's like, well, maybe we just talk about that, you know, and talk about this shift. Because maybe people will find it interesting, and I don't care if they do or not. And that's a great thing to feel. A few years ago, I really started kind of diving into this idea of like the ego versus the intuition. You know, it kind of goes along with a lot of things of like, I feel like a lot of people definitely have a understanding of like what the ego actually is. And I feel like people think of ego and they just think of like cockiness. And that's not really what it is. You know, everybody has an ego, and your ego is just more like, you know, the superficial side of you, the materialistic side of you, you know, and there's like pros and cons to it for sure. As I mentioned the pros before, like that is like the drive to like want to achieve things, which I think is good, but it's also like, you know, there's a lot of like insecurity that can come in. Like any insecurity you have that is about like the way you're perceived or anything like that is connected to your ego. You know what I mean? So it's like, it's not necessarily a cocky thing, which I know cockiness is like, you know, tied in with insecurity and everything, but you know, ego is kind of just that entire identity of yourself that is like superficial, and then your intuition is like who you know truly are, right? So I think, you know, how I was just kind of, I feel like this was a thought I was going on for a while that I kept coming back to, of the idea of ego versus intuition. And I also kind of think of it as like the devil and the angel on your shoulder. You know, like that old trope of with the devil on your shoulder would be the ego, and then the angel on your shoulder would be your intuition. You know, the one trying to guide you towards a better path, and then the devil one being like, yeah, but like this could also be fun, you know? Like the devil party or the ego party is the part that like wants to go out and party and, you know, drink and have a good time, and surround yourselves like in these big social circles to feed that beast for whatever. But then the angel side of you is like, yeah, but like it's also awesome for yourself if like you stay in and get like a really good night's sleep. You know what I mean? And I'm like oversimplifying a lot of things here. And as I always mention, I'm not an expert on anything. This is just kind of how I've come to like looking inward and kind of trying to build a really strong center within myself. Another trope that I think goes along with this is the idea of the two wolves inside of you. Like we all have two wolves inside of you. There's like the good wolf and the bad wolf. And whichever one feeds wins, because they're always at odds with each other, and I think that's like a lot of where my anxiety gets directed to a lot of the times is like the battle between those two. And I feel like I kind of have like an anxious voice in both of them. Well, maybe more in my ego than anything, I guess, of like, this insecurity, this fear, of like what people will think. Through therapy, in the last year is kind of a conclusion I came to when I like honed in on my anxiety and really like tried to pinpoint it, was like, my reputation is like very important to me, which is not a bad thing, which it's also like, yeah, like reputation is kind of important to everybody. Which another thing that I think about a lot are like tribal instincts, which I know is kind of like masculine coded way of thinking and might not have any weight to it at all. But again, it's just something that when I think about it, it just kind of like validates things in my head, like anxiety being related to reputation, the fear of being left out or like othered by your tribe. I don't know. I just like the idea of like anxiety being tied to like tribal instincts, like what the actual fear your body is feeling is related to that idea, And so like for me, there's always a lot of anxiety of like being left out of the quote unquote tribe, your community, the people around you, and that's why like I feel like with drinking, a lot of the times if I drink too much around a group of people and the next morning, my like first thoughts of anxiety are always like, was I annoying? Did I say something that made somebody upset, whatever? And it's like all this anxiety around like, was there something I did that would force me to be like exiled from, again, the quote unquote tribe, And I just find that idea fascinating. And, I don't know, it makes sense in my head, even if it's not anything real. But if you find it interesting, I don't know, read into a lot of stuff about like, humans as a tribal species. And it's a interesting way to like simplify our like instincts and like how we are the way we are, like the purpose we play within our tribes and things like that. Admittedly, don't know too much about it. I've only haven't done a deep dive on a lot of it, but just like, I don't know, looking into things and how it, relates to me and how, I don't know, I feel like I'm always trying to look deeper into like these kinds of ideas that can like explain a lot of things that, I get lost in, like as of, I don't know, the last decade or so, I just kind of really became much more like spiritual in how I look at things and the idea of like purpose. I feel like when I talk about these things, especially like guys in my life, always like think I'm weird for it, for being like more into like spiritual stuff and like even like giving any weight of assurance to like astrology and stuff. And I don't know, I think there's a lot of reasons for that, a lot to do with like, misogyny and like, culturally and everything like that. But I also think like astrology is a very easy thing to like make fun of and remove from like, well, like of all the religions in the world or belief systems, whatever, it's like that seems to be the first one that people are like, well, I know it's not that, even though that one is the only one that's based on like actual things happening in the sky, And again, these are all things I've talked about, and I'm not here to get on a high horse about astrology or anything, but it's just like, I don't know, these are things I really found some truth in, that were like validating of a lot of like thoughts I've had about myself and about the world. And and that's really all it is for me. And I don't think I'm sitting here being like, oh no, I'm 100% correct that this is definitely what it is, but it's just something that I don't know, I find interesting and I like talking about. And I've really gotten over the fact of like being like, oh, this is not something I should openly talk about because it's something that mostly women are interested in, kind of over any sort of thing that's like, oh, doing this means I'm like less of a man than I am or whatever, because I don't know, that's something that I feel like I've had to fight for a long time with like a lot of things. I don't know, even like growing up being into certain things, watching certain shows or certain movies, or, being into certain hobbies that were more meant for girls or whatever, and I always had to feel like insecure about that, especially being surrounded by mostly men growing up. Now into adulthood, again, as I have continued to build this kind of strong core for myself, it's something I'm definitely much more comfortable being like, oh yeah, that's that all of that is dumb. And if this is something I want to do, then I'm going to do it, which maybe is like, not that impressive for a 28-year-old man, but I don't know. It's something that I'm just becoming more comfortable with and felt like sharing. I don't know if it's just because it's like January or like the winter in general, but I don't know. I feel less passionate about things lately. But I'm like, fine. Again, I'm like fine with it. Like, this is kind of going back to the idea of me feeling like I'm not caring about things as much right now. And it's just something I'm noticing. And yeah, I don't know. I think it's interesting. There is definitely part of me that's like almost like fearful of that. It's like, oh, am I losing my drive? Am I losing my passion? Am I losing whatever? And I don't think I necessarily am. I think I'm just kind of like going through an interesting phase right now, where I'm just kind of like sitting back and just kind of enjoying life for the first time, in what feels like a long time, and it's been nice. And I also think, this time of year is kind of meant for that. It's meant for kind of self-reflection and just like relaxing and chilling, and just like, it's cold and dark outside. There's nothing really going on. Like, we got through the holidays. Things are about to be starting over. Like, yeah, I'm going to sit on my couch and watch movies and read books and like not really worry about it. I do have this, after doing that for a while, eventually there's this voice in my head that pops up that like makes me feel guilty. That's like, oh, well, you could be doing this right now. You could be doing things that are more productive and being more creative or whatever. But I don't know. I'm not giving as much attention to that voice as I typically would. And I'm not like feeling bad about it. And it's pretty cool to like get to this point in my life and kind of realize that I've overcome a lot of that stuff. And I've kind of graduated to this like next level of life, this like new phase that I'm entering that almost feels like maybe synonymous with like, I don't know, my 20s are coming to an end and I'm going to be into my 30s now. And I mean, I still have another year of being in my 20s, but you know what I'm saying? Like, just like spiritually of like, I've grown to a point now where it's like, I'm totally comfortable with who I am, and I'm excited about that. And I'm excited about just like hanging out and just like continuing to grow like my new life in New York, and just, enjoying my job and enjoying the city and my home. And yeah, I think a lot of this attributes to like me taking a chance on myself in moving here and being alone for the first time, being away from home for the first time. And a lot of that just like really helps ground you, and it's crazy to think back to like 4 years ago, like at 24, 2019 was like the lowest of the low I had ever been mentally. Like, And it's just crazy thinking back to that time and like thinking about who I was. And I'm like, I don't even recognize that person. Like, spiritually, don't recognize who that was. And like looking at pictures of myself even and being like, yeah, I don't know that person. That was because I feel like I wasn't really much of a person at all. I was like lost. I was just like this like shell for a while. Because I feel like most of my life growing up was just all related to ego. Like I was just a dreamer, man. I was just focused on trying to be successful in some sort of creative passion in performance, whether it was playing in a band or a singer-songwriter, or like when I was doing like rap music or stand-up comedy or whatever. Like I was just like trying to do so many different things forever, and just trying to capture people's attention to like feed my ego. And then I don't know, maybe 24 makes sense because of like the whole brain being fully developed at 25. That at 24 I don't know, I feel like I finally hit this wall of like, what the fuck am I doing? Who the fuck am I? What do I even value? What do I care about? And everything, it just felt like the walls around me just like entirely crumbled. And I just had to look at myself in the mirror and be like, I don't know what this is. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know who this is, and I don't know what I'm doing. And that was really scary. And that was around the time that I started therapy too, for that specific reason of being like, I'm terrified. Like, I don't know what my life is, and I don't know what I've been doing for the last 24 years of my life. I was just kind of living in a fantasy world forever, and maybe that's normal to some extent, like maybe a lot of people go through that. I don't know if you are a person who is like a big dreamer. Yeah, you go through that. You kind of wake up one day when you realize the dream hasn't happened, and you're like, well, what the fuck am I doing then? And it almost is a good thing that it happens too for the dream, because it's like you have to start thinking more practically. It's crazy how I never thought about what steps I had to take to be successful. I just was like, oh, it's just going to happen. I just had this like insane belief that it would just manifest if I just continued. Like I fully thought, I was just so naive that I thought like playing in a band that just like, if we just keep making music and just keep playing shows, like it's just going to work out, and it's like, yeah, I knew nothing, I was not asking questions. I was just confident that things were just going to happen, and then they didn't. Yeah. And then, eventually I'm just like, why did I think that things would just happen? It's a wild belief that you just think things will happen to you or for you without you like actually making a plan, and it's wild that when you do start being practical and making plans that you watch things happen, you do watch those things manifest, you have to put in more work than just like the bare minimum, and maybe that comes from, the privilege I've had in my life of like, that I kind of was able to, the luck of birth that I was born into a life that I was able to just kind of coast, and now, I've talked about this on the podcast before of like, I didn't come from like a lot, but it was fine. I came from, more than a lot of people probably do. And also less than a lot of people do, so it's like, I don't know. It's weird. It's also, I think it's weird, like culturally in our society that like how much weight we give to that. I see it on social media all the time on like someone mentions anything about having any sort of like help growing up. And I mean help in like, I sought out this dream. You see it a lot in like actors and actresses and stuff, because I think that is really like a privileged kid's dream to be able to fulfill, because I think it takes a lot of like comfort economically to be able to like actually strive for something like that. And there's obviously exceptions, but I don't know how many actors and actresses came from like nothing. I don't think there are that many in today's world, at least. I'm sure there was at some point when like the early days of Hollywood or whatever, when it was just like people could get discovered on the street, and maybe that does still happen. I'm just saying for the most part, but when you see it and like someone talks about it and like they're like, oh yeah, and they talk about their own personal experience, and then people will be all in the comment section be like, oh, it must be nice, oh, it must be so hard when you had two parents that were married that were able to afford to whatever, like. And I don't know, I think about this idea of like the luck of birth, and like we're all born into different situations that we have no control over. And a lot of times I think about that in the terms of like people being born into like, a poorer life, or a harder life where like economically lower on the totem pole, and then you just get born into that and you're just born into that struggle, but I think it goes both ways, like if someone's born into like a wealthy life, like they didn't choose that either, and, yes, I think it's on them to like develop the self-awareness of that and like also realize their privilege in that. But it's not going to happen every time, because it's like, I don't know, unless it's like shoved in your face or you get some sort of firsthand experience that makes you think about it. Like you just are your experience, and I say that a lot. Where was I even going with this? I don't even remember. Talking about the way that I grew up, I guess. And I was able to just kind of coast, I watched my parents work really hard though to get us like up a class level, I guess. Not like we made some crazy jump, but like, I remember being a little kid and like my dad was a restaurant manager and my mom was a server, and she was going back to school for X-ray, and then my dad was going back to school for restaurant management, and then he got like his master's so he could teach it, and then so he became like a teacher at like a vocational high school, and then my mom was doing MRI, which was a new technology at the time. So I like watched, I was able to like firsthand experience this like shift in like class, essentially, like of being like, again, it was never like, I don't think we were ever like struggling, but it like, I don't know, I was wearing hand-me-downs for the first like 15 years of my life, you know what I mean? Because it was like, that was just like all we could afford. It's like you buy clothes for the oldest kids, and then when they grow out of it, you give it to the younger kids, and the same idea of like, as I've talked about on here, that my friend Max thinks I should somehow turn into a stand-up bit or a one-man show about how my brother and I shared a bed for like 8 or 9 years, and then eventually I got my own bed, and then eventually I got my own room, and it was like, and as my brothers got older and moved out, and like, then that afforded, a little bit of space for my parents to breathe a little bit more, you know what I mean? And then, we get a pool in the yard, or when, we moved to the suburbs, put a pool in the backyard, and it's like, things like that. And I just like watched my parents' work pay off, you know what I mean? Rather than being born into like just being born into the 4-bedroom house with the pool in the yard. It's like, oh yeah, no, I started in one place and watched my parents bring us to this other place. So, I was kind of able to just coast, and I had a privilege in that, but it also like instilled a work ethic in me that was like, oh yeah, if you work really hard, like, or you have to work really hard essentially to like be able to achieve those things. And there was a lot of like humility, I think, that taught me, and like gave me a sense of pride in like wanting to work. I got a job as soon as I was 14 and shit, and with my paychecks I saved up my first however many paychecks to buy like a used MacBook, just so I can have like access to GarageBand, so I can have like a recording software, so I can start recording the music that I was writing. And then eventually got like a cheap USB interface, and then like a microphone, and and I just like built this like little mini home studio. And it was like, I wanted to keep working so that I could keep building that, so I could start doing the work that I wanted to do, you know, and like do those things. And that is like, was the ego in me that was like, I'm going, you know, this is how I'm going to achieve my goals. So I don't know, but all that to say, I went on a crazy tangent there, but at 24, when I hit that like complete low, right? It was like, you know, a couple years post-college, which I think I've talked on here before. I'm sure I have, about like the post-college years for me were really tough, because like college for me was really where like I hit my stride. I felt like as a person of like, I met people that like I felt like I didn't have to like be somebody else around to be accepted. And, you know, it really was like, oh yeah, no, I can kind of be myself here. And I don't really know who that is, because I feel like I kind of lost sight of that in high school for a lot of different reasons. Some traumatic events happened to me, I would say between like 5th grade and, I don't know, sophomore, junior year of high school. A series of like traumatic events that I won't get into. But those things kind of, I like lost myself along the way, if you will, you know? And then college was like, helped me kind of like bring it back and be like, oh yeah, this was more what I was trying to do with my life. This was more like, I forgot what it felt like to like feel comfortable in my skin, you know? And then because of that, I feel like there was such, it like hit me so deep internally, in college, like that idea of like, oh yeah, I kind of lost who I was, that I almost like was just, I was more focused on that than like actually the school part of it. You know, I was like, which I feel like, you know, is the more important part of college, you know, like the college experience and the growth that it can bring you. On New Year's Eve, I was hanging out with a friend of mine who's in college right now, and he goes to the same school that I does, and I swear to God, he's like a younger version of me, because of like how similar we are, and he just reminds me of a younger me, except he's like way ahead of the game in terms of like knowing who he is and things like that, and the things he worries about I didn't worry about until like way later on. But anyway, the whole point of like him talking about like, I don't know if college is worth it, you know, for what I want to do or whatever. And that was a thing that I struggled with a lot post-college, because like, again, I was focused on like having a good college experience and like growing myself as a person and like kind of like building a network and like a good core group of friends, because those things matter, you know, much more than I think a career matters. And I think that's, you know, there was a point in our society where like, that was like the idea of like post-education was like to continue growing yourself. And I feel like the shift happened, and my brain wants to say probably around the Reagan era, if I had to guess. I know he's like my scapegoat for everything, but I'm just willing to bet here. This is a completely baseless accusation, but I'm willing to bet something happened around that time that changed the shift, because there was if you look back into like, you know, sociology of like the 1950s and 60s, and like, you know, when this strong middle class was built and people were going to college, they were just going just to further their education and just like continue to grow as people. And a lot of people, you know, a lot of historians or whatever will like attribute that, a lot of that to the civil rights movement, or attribute the civil rights movement to that, I think is what I'm trying to say. So like this idea of like people kind of continued to get an education in order to like open their minds a little bit more, you know? And I feel like that, it, you know, this shift happened where it became like more like career oriented. That was like going to college was just for the purpose of like trying to get a career. And I don't know. I never looked at it that way. And I probably should have for economic reasons, you know, because I was so focused again on like my experience and like my growth and as a person and all the things I already mentioned. And then, you know, I graduated and it was like, oh, I didn't think about what was going to happen after this, like when it was done. And I struggled a lot, and then I got hit with these crazy student loans that I've talked about on here before about, the debt that I'm in. And I kind of, was really hard on myself and was kicking myself a lot of being like, you idiot. Like, why did you do that? Why did you focus on yourself and your growth and your college experience and partying and being social and all this stuff when you should have been focused on a career? Because now it's all over and you're stuck at your parents' house. You don't know what you're doing with your life and you're drowning in student loan debt, So like, and now I'm talking to this kid who's like, a younger version of me who's kind of in the situation of being like in college and being like, I don't know if this is what I want. And and then I was honest with him and I'm like, dude, for a long time, like after I graduated college, I had this question hanging over my head of like, if I could go back to being 18, knowing what I know now, like of like the economic burden I would face and, whether or not it was worth it, or like if I could go back to 18 and the question comes up of, would you still go? It's such a hard question to answer. And I, at first I think in those years of like my early 20s, I probably would say, no, I would not go. Because of, how much I was struggling both with like myself and economically, and then, or financially, I don't know, economically makes sense, right? It doesn't matter. But now I'm like, yes, no, I absolutely would go because it's like the experience, you can't put a price on it. And like the people I met and, the relationships, the friendships, everything, got me to this point that I'm at now. Like this specific point of like the career I now have, the place I now have, like everything led me to this point that is like this point of like, God damn, we finally made it. You know what I mean? After all that and looking back on it and knowing what I've been through, like, yeah, it was worth everything, If this podcast can be anything, I would want it to be just like a guide for anybody that feels lost. You know what I mean? I know that like probably it almost sounds like I'm like a cult leader in that sense of like, because that's what cult leaders do. They just like prey on people who feel lost and give them a sense of comfort or whatever. But I'm saying for yourself, 4 years ago, straight up, like just, I did not want to be here. Like I did not want to be alive. I wanted to check out. I was like so done. And it's wild now to like be where I'm at and think back to that time. That was just 4 years ago, like one election cycle ago. And I was, and now I'm just at a completely different point in my life and have, kind of reached this, I don't know, just looking at like the growth and like the hole I was able to like crawl myself out of and actually build something for myself. I don't know. It's just kind of wild. So if it's you or if it's somebody I don't know, anybody who you might know, especially people in their early 20s, people fresh out of college, people who are just like trying to figure it out and feel lost and reach out to, I don't know. I'm trying to think of something to say that doesn't sound like the corniest thing in the world, to be like, it gets better, or like, you're going to be fine. And I can't really think of anything besides like, just keep going, I guess, which also feels lame to say. I don't have a great, I'll have to think on that. If somebody else has something more creative to say. I didn't think I was going to talk about all this today, but we did. And we'll leave it at that. And I don't know. I hope you got something out of this. I certainly feel like I did. Enjoy your weeks. This comes out Monday, Martin Luther King Jr. Day. Shout out to him. And go Bills. Hopefully they beat the Steelers. See ya.